Depending on the source, there are between 3 and over a dozen feminine archetypes. So the 3 that many people are familiar with would be maid, mother, and crone. But there's also sage, there's a wild woman, there's warriors.
What we have seen in the history of West Africa in particular, which is where most of us in the diaspora have come from lineally, we've seen archetypes of women as marketplace women, women who have traded and made money, and that's very evident still today. So we know, there's really no history of African women in particular being housewives in the sense of the construct that we use in the West. They have always been marketplace women. And even the deity and the deities in West Africa that represent the exchange of money and marketplace energy, many of them like Oya in the Yoruba, by the Benin Kingdom, are represented by feminine energy. Some other very common archetypes, but maybe we haven't placed them in that way in our African history, would also be, of course, the Queen Mother. And we've seen not just spiritual archetypes around the Queen Mother, but also political and social organization around the Queen Mother. So in Ghana, they say that they cannot have a civilization without a Queen Mother. And we have to understand, when we think of like Queen Nana Yasantua or someone like that, the queen is not the wife of the king like we see in the West. The queen has typically been the mother or the grandmother of the king. So that's more common in our history and culture. So the marketplace woman, the queen mother. We've also seen the one who has brought beauty and love and light into people, like commonly understood to be Oshun, that which brings beauty to society, art, creativity, intuition. And definitely we have seen a major archetype of women dealing with herbs and healing and agriculture. Not just cooking for the family, but literally healing people, the prayer warriors that we would probably express in that way, in the Americas and the Caribbean. But the healer, women have been known to be able to spiritually intervene to protect their families or even their whole communities, and in cases of war, whole societies. And there is still the archetype of the woman warrior, like the movie The Woman King, that has definitely existed for eons of time and into the contemporary era, where you see women doing direct combat or political organizing. And so we've seen that replicate itself many times.
Well, I think we see them all to some degree or another. We do see maid, we do see mother, we do see crone, we do see alchemists. We see women who are being visionaries in the fields. We also see, and this is rarely talked about, but we also see dark feminine archetypes. So we do have black widows. We do have the wicked mother, for instance. So the wicked mother is the woman who abuses or kills her children. In fact, there was a child, well, she was a child, she's a woman, who was released from prison, and she was a victim of Munchausen by proxy. Her mother, Dee Dee Blanchard, kept her in a wheelchair, told everybody she had leukemia. So these archetypes do also exist. Delphine Lalaurie in the 1800s in Louisiana murdered slaves. And but we see positive ones, I think, to some degree. They are all present, and definitely in Amish country, you're going to see more of the mother and maid archetype than you would in an urban environment. And then in rural environments, you're more going to see, I think, the wild woman come out than you would in the big city. So it just depends on where you are in America, generally speaking. My partner recently acquired 500 acres of land. And when I'm on that land, I'm completely the wild pharaoh woman. I'm just part of the land. When I am engaged in academia, then I'm more the visionary and sage. And I think the same thing, we see that in cities. We see that in religions as well. I mentioned the Amish. Certainly an Appalachian woman is going to embody different archetypes than a woman in Los Angeles is going to. And then, yes, the patriarchy, because there are still men who perceive women as maiden weak, that we're not fit for science, we're not fit for jobs or positions that are traditionally male. And so there is a desire to keep women still a bit subjugated. But I also think that that's trying to be healed in some way, because we do see more women in STEM. We do see more men supporting women in those positions. But yes, overall, I think it is, bound up in your geographic location, your religion, and your friends and your family. And we also have to consider media. We do have women who base their ideas of themselves and the archetypes they want to embody on influencers. The funny thing is that, I was thinking about movies as well, and television shows. And so like in Gone with the Wind, you had Scarlett and Melanie, who I see as two halves of the same integrated person. You have the mother, and then you have the strong woman, who kind of is also a seductress. So I kind of like to think of it as a little goddess movie in some ways, because they're really trying to integrate themselves, and they do near the end, they do come to form a powerful friendship, especially when Scarlett kills a soldier that comes into the house, and Melanie lies for her, and they jointly help cover it up. And then you think about, say Disney movies, which are based on fairy tales. You have a wicked stepmother that we grew up with. We have movies like The Little Mermaid that made, and then archetypal women that have changed over time from, Leave It to Beaver to, say, Married with Children to Desperate Housewives. We just see them kind of spaced out, and I feel like women are just trying to be whole, and so each of these archetypes are present on their way to wholeness. They're moving us toward paths to healing. This is a hurt you have. So embrace that dark, embrace that shadow, and learn to see its strengths, because they're not necessarily wholly negative. They can also be a source of strength in situations you may not want to be in. If I'm in a threatening situation, I know that I could be a warrior, as I've taken self-defense. I know how to shoot a gun. I'm not afraid to do battle. That's not who I am in like any normal situation. I'm not like that day to day, but I know that it can be. And, someone take those two extremes, like I said, because they're on that path to becoming whole, and maybe they never heal. I doubt Dorothea Puente ever healed her shadow side. She was in the 1980s an elderly woman who killed pensioners in her boarding house for money. So I doubt she ever got to that place in wholeness. But I think a lot of women are trying to get there. We are trying.
The Iranian diaspora, I would say that is getting more into the warrior archetype because of the mythology, that combination of different cultures. The Iranian women in diaspora, and especially the Iranian women in the United States of America that I've been in contact with and I've seen, they're getting more into that, and they're finding ways to get more into that. Of course, they're given the space and the resources. We have the resources here. To a certain point, it's equally, to a certain point, distributed. So they're taking advantage of that and developing that archetype. I see that, and I see that in myself as well. That's wonderful to see. The mother archetype is definitely with Iranian women. I guess majority of women identify with that archetype. So I see that still with Iranian women. The mystic archetype has been with Iranian women because of, again, the culture and the religious part of the culture and all that. It has been carried over. We see that, but it's kind of like it's losing color. It's becoming lighter and not that significant in people's lives. So yeah, I see that because of the warrior part, the archetype that is getting stronger, that sense of entrepreneurship is getting much stronger. It has become more developed. Many Iranian women identify with that, especially in the United States, especially in California. Many successful women in that area. So I personally really enjoyed seeing that. It's just wonderful to see. Sage archetype, the wise woman archetype, actually it is with the Iranian women because it's also, from how I look at it and how I see it, is like it is expected of them to be. And when earlier I talked about me not identifying much with the maiden archetype, I think many of us don't, because it's kind of like has a very short-lived that archetype. It's like at a certain age, which is very young age, the maiden needs to grow up and becomes a woman. How I look at it, there is nothing between the maiden archetype and the development into the wise and sage woman archetype. Something in the middle is missing. It's like at very young age, the woman is expected to move immediately from the maiden part into the, but to an older stage. The middle part, from how I look at it, is missing. So, but now when we talk about women in diaspora, I guess with the improvement and development of science and technology and everything, and the culture of the host country, the host culture, it kind of puts more emphasis on the maiden part, the maiden archetype, and the women in diaspora. I see that they're more. It's like the maiden part is kind of like expanding. It's becoming longer. But again, I don't see a middle phase in between. Either you are maiden or you're very wise. You're supposed to get married and get into that, and then the maiden part is finished. And then you have to be wise. You have to be really well behaved. It's like the lover archetype. It's missing. It's like the women are not expected to be lovers. They are the object of affection. They are the beloved to a certain point. As long as they have that beauty and that youthfulness. So they are wanted, they are desired. But they are not expected to, or they are not allowed, actually, maybe that's a better way to say, or they're suppressed of having and developing that archetype, lover archetype. I'm thinking that, okay, we are not expected to be lovers, and then because of that we make mistakes, because we don't have that experience. And then it looks like if you get into that archetype and want to live that archetype, identify with that, then all of a sudden it's expected that there are consequences with that, with that decision, and the consequences are expected to be negative. Like you become the fallen woman. Immediately, without even going there, you're fallen already. So I'm looking at it. It's so fascinating, and there are so many questions come with it. First of all, why? And I know the why. it's a patriarchal society, and so many things come with it. So when I look at it, I'm fine with it if each person looks at these archetypes and decide which one I want to identify with. I mean, we get to that point that you have enough knowledge to decide, and you have the wisdom, and all that. But many, as you said, many of them are suppressed. When I look at these archetypes, the lover archetype is definitely suppressed. Another one, like the sage woman, is underscored, emphasized, accepted, and so it's fascinating. You look at the details, yeah.
In China, I would say there's involvement from one specific feminine archetype to a more diverse group of archetypes among Chinese women in China. In the very old days, or historically singing, Chinese women always perceived as the archetype of mother. Something particular about that archetype is we do appreciate women's quality in terms of loving and caring, but we also confine women into this one particular archetype. If other women happen to have innate archetypes such as sage, huntress, or maiden, they may have a hard time to navigate through their life without facing the risk of humiliation. This in the past in China, not until early 90s, here's a historical moment change, which is the Chinese economic reform. Women have access to start to have access to education and access to financial independence. They are expected to perform a much more masculine-oriented energies when they're navigating through their life, their career development, and their professional life. So I do see this strong change happen to all the women in China since early 90s. And now we're getting to the era that we see a much diverse archetypes living in Chinese women in China. And people are more confident to identify with different archetypes innate in them. This is how I observed the evolvement technically from mother's archetype all the way into a diverse and beautiful blossom of multiple archetypes co-living together.
I suppose we can't talk about that without acknowledging the impact of colonisation, particularly where my family comes from. There were it was active genocide. There were slaughters and massacres of my people. And, it's as a result of that colonisation, a lot of my family had to leave. I can talk about my grandmother who was living on country, and my mother was born in country. But due to the impacts of colonisation and at the time the policies around taking children away, stealing children from Aboriginal families, my grandmother had to make a decision about that it was not safe for them to live there anymore. So they moved to Sydney. So a lot of those cultural, kind of traditions and knowledge was disrupted because they've had to come off country. They'd had to, regroup in Sydney. There was a significant shame around and fear of being Aboriginal. Because if you, looked Aboriginal or you identified as Aboriginal, then it was highly likely that your children would be taken or that you would not have access to school. You wouldn't be allowed to go to school. You wouldn't, and so a lot of our Aboriginality was shut down at that point in time because we didn't have the freedom to be who we are. That certainly has had an impact on my knowledge around, Ngarabal cultural practices and Ngarabal women. But what I can say is that I used to live with my grandmother. So I feel like I was very privileged in terms of living with her and being able to, in the context of our home, and being able to get little sources of information and being able to hear these stories. And she had a pink laminate table that had about, I think, 6 chairs, and so we all used to sit around this table, and all my aunties used to come, and they used to bring long necks of VB, which are big bottles of beer, and they all used to sit around this table. And I was supposed to go to preschool, but I wouldn't go because this was way too interesting. And I used to sit around this table with my aunties and my grandmother and listen to these stories. That was just, to me, like gold. Even at such a young age, I remember those stories. I remember I have the visual. I can see where people were sitting. These memories have stayed with me. And I think, to me, that's, from those experiences, what I learned was that despite, the genocide, the colonisation, my family, my female Aboriginal family, was so strong and so determined and, constantly bounce back from adversity all the time. They were warriors. They were 100% warriors, yet they, within the context of all the atrocious things that had happened, they still had kindness and compassion for others and, and extended that kindness and compassion, outwards. And so from that perspective too, they were healers in terms of, sitting all together in that circle, gaining strength from one another in a world that was not accepting of them. And so they were definitely warriors and healers and the most beautiful women. And it was just such a privilege to be able to have that experience and live in that experience, but also at my age still remember it,
Well, unlike what most people's impression of it is, matriarchy is not the flip side of patriarchy. Matriarchy is governance by women, but generally speaking, I would say it's always the group of women and not like a pyramid, top-down kind of rulership, but a horizontal group experience of collaboration and consensus and egalitarianism. One of the important things about matriarchal cultures, the ones we know about that are still alive today, is that they're egalitarian. They're not women over men. And so it's never the flip side of patriarchy. And it's taken decades of education to try to get people to understand that very important difference, because otherwise the media and the general public discourse always dismisses matriarchy as, first of all, unappealing, because, you know, women taking revenge or whatever. And then anthropologists have for decades denied that there is such a thing as matriarchy. They used to tell us in the 70s and 80s that there were no living matriarchies, and therefore we couldn't say in the goddess movement that there ever had been. And so it was like a double bind, and we were locked into it until the 2000s, the early 2000s, when the matriarchal studies movement, an international movement of women all across the globe that started in Germany, when that movement took shape and started to have conferences and so on, the indigenous people from different matriarchal cultures around the world were invited to participate and sponsored to participate. And so then we got the real education about living matriarchal cultures. And that allowed people like me, who have worked with the old European goddess civilization that Maria Gimbutas, the Lithuanian-born archaeologist, really put on the map. It allows us to maintain our belief that that's the original matriarchal structure, and that we all came out of Africa and we went apparently everywhere in the world and became different colors and so on and so forth. But basically that matriarchal, that early original matriarchal structure that I believe is part of our evolution, went with us. And so the goddess in some form, the great mother, the earth mother, some form of understanding nature and universal life as coming from a great mother figure or a great goddess figure, an ancestral female figure, a matrix figure. And so that's been a lot of my work for more than 40 years.
It's definitely any archetype that a culture can say is a fixture of the culture is going to affect the way others or other cultures engage with all people, regardless of your individual persona or archetype. And so when we see archetypes that deviate from women in positions of respect, like the prostitute archetype or the stripper archetype or the woman that is disengaged from community and just about self, for example, it is not reason for other people to then treat all of our women with disrespect, but it is an entry point by which definitely the society that we live in and the pervading images that wish to control the rest of the culture, they will absolutely elevate that particular image and say, see, this is who you are, this is how you are. And in fact, it's meaningful and it's profitable for you to replicate this particular image, which both engages the capitalist system, but also disengages a level of respect that is afforded to the women, the children, and the community at large. And so we've seen what has been paraded as a dominant form of Black womanhood is a woman that is disengaged from her family, is a woman that is seeking capital by any means necessary and is willing to do anything, which definitely undermines her political savviness. It undermines her sageness. It undermines all the other archetypes that exist. Her ability to heal her community, her ability to be an advisor to her community if she can be bought and sold at any cost.
The 1700s, well, even before the United States was the United States when it was just colonies, but
still at the beginning, most of the archetypes that we saw were going to be maid and mother. Women were not really working. Women were not in positions of political power. Women were not forming institutions of learning or being teachers. But at the same time, we also had the Salem witch trials. So we had a witch archetype that was present during that time. And some of that was due to women having some position of power because they had land and they had money. And so those women who had power and money were envied by men. And we know what happened with that. But generally speaking, at the beginning of the United States, women were treated simply as maid, mother, crone. They weren't seen past that. We did have, of course, prostitutes. We did have seductresses. And over time, this has changed, especially with the waves of feminism that came about, suffragettes, when women began using their powerful voice to say, we are more than these things. We are teachers. We are visionaries. We are wild. We are strong. We can be warriors. We can do all these things. So what changed, I think, over time in the United States is women got tired of those roles that were being assigned to them and started bringing out their own empowerment, their own roles for themselves, and proved their worth, proved that they were more than just this mother, this maid, this woman who has to cook, for her husband. And again, as I said previously, now we do have men more supporting of women in higher institutions of learning and STEM and the political environment. So it's definitely changed dramatically since the advent, since the nascent United States was a thing. We have much more power to women than we did then, definitely.
In regard to Iranian women in diaspora, since they bring, again, I emphasize that this is how I look at it, since they bring that sage archetype with them and the mystic archetype and the warrior archetype, for all the years that I've lived in the United States, which is 35 years, I think. Yeah, 35 years. I have seen respect from the host community when it comes to Iranian women. Not only in regard to myself, but to others. The adjectives that are used to describe Iranian women are usually very, very positive. Like they actually say they're warriors, they're strong, they're wise, and all that. So it makes me happy actually to hear that. It's not. I'm not saying that we're all very wise and warriors, but how the community, the host community, treats Iranian women and sees Iranian women is very uplifting actually. And actually recently I had a colleague a few months ago during the uprising of Women, Life, Freedom. She was asking me where are the demonstrations. She wanted to go and show her support, and very wonderful adjectives, positive adjectives she used to describe Iranian women. And she said throughout her life, any Iranian woman she came across were intelligent, hardworking, dedicated, and all that. So that's how I see it in the diaspora. But in regard to Iran, I really don't know, because I haven't been back to Iran for more than 20 some years, and I cannot go back actually. But from what I see from the internet, and I follow many men, women in Iran who have a platform on Instagram and Twitter and this and that. And from what I see is that they are also, the women in Iran, they have this connection with Iranian women outside. And of course there is coming and going. Many Iranians go back to Iran for the summer holidays and this and that. So they have been exposed. The ones inside have been exposed to what's happening with the community outside, Iranians outside, and they're learning. They're gathering information, and they're using that to, within the limitations that they have in Iran, to grow. And through the social media that I follow these people, it's so amazing to see that they have their own entrepreneurship, small businesses, and at the same time that they're doing that and making their life and developing and growing, they're also fighting. Some of them actually are putting their lives online for what they're doing. But they use their creativity to have their voice, and many of them, you see that they're offering whatever that it is that they're offering in their business, or whatever it is, services that they offer, and they're doing it without hijab. So fighting at the same time that they're growing. It's so fantastic to see that. And it's just like, sometimes I'm like, how can you do this? You are working and you're, developing and creating a life for yourself in a very creative way. Some of them are so creative when you see what they're doing. And then at the same time, you're fighting. And there are videos, people put videos online. They're fighting with the guards, says you have to wear hijab, and she's saying, no, I'm not going to wear. Some of them get arrested, they come back and they're doing the same thing again and again, and still fighting and fighting and fighting and fighting. So I'm saying that they're being treated like that. They're seeing what's happening with the outside world and with the communication that they have with Iranian women outside Iran. They're learning, they're developing, and many Iranian women outside are helping their sisters in Iran in many different ways. And so these women in Iran are growing, and at the same time still out there and fighting.
I would say when we go on the journey of seeking the self, we will always encounter different challenges and obstacles. In terms of challenges, in China, we would have to face a collective force from patriarchal society telling us to go back to the archetype of mother, to have family, to have children, to exercise caring and loving, and also losing ourselves. In the United States, my experience is not too confined to the collective expectations, but to be more authentic to what's the calling for myself and who I want to be and what group of people I want to hang out with, I want to grow with, and who I want to serve. It's more freedom, I would say, in the United States for women to stay true to themselves. But these days in China, women are also aware of their need to connect with their authentic archetypes and goddess power living inside of them. They're acknowledging it, and they need more support to achieve that journey, the reunion with the divine power.
I mean, the treatment of Aboriginal women across the nation has been absolutely appalling. We have been called bad mothers. Our children have been removed from us. The blame has been placed on us because trauma behaviours associated with colonisation, those trauma behaviours have been turned on us, that it's somehow something wrong with us, that we have reacted in this way. When we get angry, we are the angry black woman. So we get classified if we are assertive, we get classified if we're too passive. We get, these labels that are associated with us are all deficit labels. There is nothing strength-based in the labels that Australia, white Australia, has placed on us. and the destruction to our social and emotional well-being from that has been profound. Our connections to country, family, kin, ancestors, spirituality have all been impacted by these destructive labels that have kind of permeated society. People are not recognising how resilient and how strong we are, that we are still here, we are still fighting, we are still standing up every day, you know, on the back of a referendum on Saturday that just occurred on Saturday to allow us to have a voice in Parliament that that is kind of testament to, I suppose, when a whole country, when we 3% of the population votes on whether we are entitled to have a voice in Parliament, to have an advisory board that is going to, be able to provide culturally safe and culturally responsive, advice to the government about issues that affect us, and yet the whole country voted no. We live in a country that has absolutely defined us. And it is very hard, I think, for us to keep trying to stand up all the time when we are constantly being disregarded, not valued, not seen as the first people of this country. That has an impact, I think, on women, Aboriginal women, because by nature we are protective and nurturing of our families, and so these kind of stereotypes and labels that are placed on us are very destructive. What I witnessed with my grandmother and my mother, the struggle that they had, in terms of being safe to say who they were, the trauma that they carried through their experiences, and particularly, I think, through my grandmother's experiences, that trauma really has been passed down generation to generation. For both my mum and my grandmother, it was very difficult for them to feel proud or acknowledge, safely who they were, because it wasn't safe,
Well, the international matriarchal studies movement has been really incredible. It's been in existence now for 20 years, and the other pioneering influence in that movement is Genevieve Vaughn, who lives part of the time in the States and part of the time in Italy. And she's a philosopher and a philanthropist, and has been active in the women's movement for most of her adult life. And she has developed something called the maternal gift economy. Now, there's been a gift economy philosophical movement for a long time, and her Italian husband, was part of that. And that's how she was introduced into the work decades and decades ago. And then she began to realize that they were missing the central component, the mother, and the fact that the original gift is the gift of life that comes to us through the mother, the mother goddess who gives us all life on earth, the mother in each of us, the potential mother in each of us, not that we have to be mothers, but when someone becomes a mother, they automatically kind of sacrifice the self in a way, the bodily self, in order to make room for this growing child. And so then the child, human children require a certain kind of nurture after they're born that other animals don't need. Our upright posture created the need for incredible nurturance and nourishment and care for a brand new human infant. So human infants are not able to survive on their own. And one of the things that Genevieve says about the gift economy is that it's giving to needs without recompense, without expecting something in return. It's really different from the exchange economy that we live inside of and that we're so used to referring to and assuming is natural. But what Genevieve says, and what I believe, is that it's not natural, it's an overlay, the whole exchange monetary system, and that the gift is the original gift. And we all receive the gift, which is a wonderful way of thinking about matriarchy. We all received the gift because we were born and we're still alive. So someone nurtured us and kept us, allowed us to survive. Boys and girls receive that gift. So the fact that some sort of socialization happens in the early life of children, where boys are taught to separate from that gift and from being the giver. They separate, they're not that. And that's a form of socialization. It's oppressive. And so boys have to learn to let go of that and be different in order to actualize themselves in a gendered way in the culture. But that's all of that is false, or it's an overlay. And we can all get back to our original experience of the gift, the actual gift of matriarchal nurturance, the mother and child. That's the original unit. That's what the feminist anthropologists have taught us. The original unit of society is the mother and child, and then the other offspring, and then the extended family of daughters and more children, and the brothers who act as uncles to the children. In matriarchy, the husband isn't so important. Some matriarchal cultures don't even have marriage or husbands. But in general, whatever the structure of their marriage customs, matriarchal societies recognize the mother's brother as the blood male influence on the children and he's like the social father, which is just incredibly mind-boggling to those of us in the West who are locked into the idea that monogamy and the mom and dad, are essential, the biological mom and dad. It's a falsehood. It's not essential. The mother, of course, is essential. So then that takes us back to matriarchy. That's really what it is. The word means beginning with the mothers, or mothers at the beginning. Matriarchy. And then patriarchy is a falsehood. It doesn't begin with the father. Sometimes in many cultures, women don't even know who the father is. There could be many possibilities. And certainly in the animal world, that's true. And some scientists have even suggested that that's evolutionary, and has a kind of, it's good for the immune system and for the genealogy in some way, that the mother's body is able to choose which sperm is going to fertilize that child. We love that.
We do.
There is a continuation of many of the earliest archetypes of African women in the African American community, because that's where we came from. That is our tradition. But there are also new archetypes that have emerged under the pressures and systematic oppression of living in the Western culture. And so we see all of the ones before that I named, the sage, the warrior, the healer. We see that still in African American traditions, but there is also a major archetype that we see here in terms of a prostitution or a culture where there's a whole archetype of women that we identify just based off their sexual exchange for capital. And that is something that probably has always existed in time, but it was never an archetype, which means a type of woman that would be modeled over and over and over again that we would see so prevalently in society. But definitely the systematic patriarchal capitalism, say, for example, in America, has compressed gender in such a way that anything and everything should be exchanged for capital. And so we see that emerge and lauded, celebrated as a new type of archetype in African American women.
I would also say that the prostitute goes back far. It goes back far because in Greece and Egypt and Sumeria, there were sacred prostitutes that would be in the temples, especially in Greece. Elysian Mysteries were temple prostitutes. And it wasn't until recently that we realized that some of the Egyptian priestesses were also prostitutes. So I think it goes back farther than that. But now, we have OnlyFans in America. We have a lot of sex work. We have a lot of women trying to embody that as a way to gain power, gain financial success, or just empower themselves. So that is blossoming in an interesting way to see. And I'm not sure how much of that is healthy and how much of it is destructive. I think some of it could be destructive, and I think some of it is healthy.
From my point of view, there are two kinds of, for example, when we talk about the warrior woman archetype, there is the mythic character, mythic part to it, and then there is the religious part to it. So earlier I talked about the Islamic Republic and how it's emphasizing the religious part. So that's one thing that for the last 45 years is becoming more colorful, and it has more platform. It has the space to show itself, and so many women have added that to their narratives. But at the same time, I personally think that majority of Iranian women, doesn't matter what part of Iran they are or what language they speak, because we speak many different languages in Iran. So it doesn't matter. The mythical part of the warrior woman is very strong. There are certain characters in our mythology that, especially when there are uprisings, like the last one that we had, Women Life Freedom, during the uprisings, and especially when there are women, younger women involved, those characters come to the upfront, and all of a sudden, almost everybody identifies with those characters that are certain warrior woman archetypes. So the mythical part is very strong in the Iranian psyche, and especially, not especially, but with Iranian women as well.
I love seeing historically how the soul archetype of mother evolved into a diverse mix sort of archetypes for women. I believe the social influence is one of the key pieces. For example, women do have more access to education and financial independence that will prepare them to be aware of who they are and to be aware of who they want to be. They are no longer dependent on men. They have to become someone who can proudly claim who they are. And I believe this is a very important collective growth for women in China. Because for so many years, thousands, 100 years, we've been living with this mom archetype, which is defined who we are. Although I believe we do have loving and caring qualities with mom's archetype within all of us. However, there are also other potential divine powers we did not get a chance to explore. I think the very key piece of human development for women in China is we become more aware. We're not only aware of our own feminine archetypes inside of us, we're also aware of others. And we're aware of the collective feminine archetypes we own as women living in China and try to lead a good life and path to well-being.
I think that I can't really, again, there's, we're made up of so many different countries, Aboriginal countries in Australia. It's a beautiful thing. Every country is quite different in terms of cultural practices, language groups, male and female roles. A lot of those structures have been dismantled, because of colonisation. I haven't really had the opportunities to witness, roles per se as they would have been, I think when we talk about men's roles, we really have to acknowledge that Aboriginal men's roles have been significantly impacted by colonisation, and because of the horrendous rates of Aboriginal men who are incarcerated. So they've been taken away from those roles and they've been placed in custody, where for some men that is a journey that starts at 9, 10 and is ongoing right throughout their life. That they are just, it's a cycle of, and so women have had to kind of, I suppose, dive in a little bit to what was potentially not traditional, but in order for survival, we've had to try to kind of tap into roles that maybe, in the past were not really part of what, we would have done. Aboriginal women now at the very centre and core of, of family, of, protecting that family, but also, sadly, because of the rates of incarceration, are the source of providers.
Well, the main evidence for the existence of matriarchal societies that did not yet have writing that we could read is archaeological, often linguistic, sometimes mythological. When there finally is writing in an area, we get mythologies about ancient people, heroic figures, that come out of our past. And so in the case of Old Europe, which is my specialty, it was a farming culture that began 9,000 years ago. They had a script, but it was a symbolic script, not a written cursive script like we think of when we think of writing. And it's never been translated because it's so old, there's nothing to compare it to. So there was a way that the people were communicating their beliefs through symbols and ideograms, I think is what they're called, before there were letters of the alphabet. Anyway, there's enough archaeological and artistic evidence to show that, for instance, the old European civilization was definitely peaceful, woman-centered, very ritualistic, and extremely artistic. The ceramics and the images that we have that point to the clothing, and the fact that they developed weaving, all of those things show us show us a real civilization. It was spread really all over, from Greece up into Central Europe and into Eastern Europe. It was a very big, very widespread and diverse culture of goddess worship. And then from there, we have 9,000 years of continuity in the symbol systems. And we find that everywhere in Europe still today, in the traditional foods, in the bread baking, in the weaving traditions, in the dance and art traditions, what we call folk art and folk dance, are really, it's how women's culture went underground in a certain sense, and mothers to daughters continued to teach the old ways. And even some of that came to the States, but there was so much assimilation that it's much harder to find here. In Europe, it's still really present. You just go into the mountains. You go to some rural village up in the mountains in Italy, and they have a snake festival, and they have a bread festival, and they have a festival where the mother and the daughter come from different towns nearby and meet up, and there's this glorious, ecstatic, happy holiday of really celebrating spring and the return of life, and the return of the mother and daughter we see in Greek mythology of Demeter and Persephone, and so on.
For me, when I look at my family, there were females around and they were being humans, but I didn't have like that hand holding. I didn't have someone like teach me what it was to be a woman and to step into my femininity. And so just what I saw actually a lot of maiden, even though my mother's married to my father. My mother was married at 18, and she was kind of pushed toward that by her mother. And her mother was a single mother. And so there's all these generational ties and things. Like my mother's mother didn't have, her mother died so my great-grandmother died at 17. So my grandmother didn't have the influence of her mother. So how all that ties in together. So I didn't have like that generational learning. And it's something that I'm creating. I'm in a lot of women's groups, and so I can see it. And like, for me, it's kind of like a relearning and reprogramming. So I saw the maiden, and I also saw, I would say caretaker, not necessarily like nurturing mother, but like caring for others in a sense of caring for others before caring for oneself is what I was exposed to.
I do have a sense of what I was exposed to, but for what I was exposed to, I didn't align with it. And so I kind of ran away in my 30s. But I was raised with the queen archetype in front of me. And so I thought that that's what I had to be. I thought I have to find a husband. I have to get married. I have to be that loyal wife. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that wasn't my calling. And so I ran away in my 30s, moved to California with my kids. And that's where I think the huntress was born, or, parts of the maiden that I didn't get to experience. And I don't think that maiden was mirrored for me as an adolescent and as a young adult either, because it was more of, you're going to go straight from 18 to here's how you be a queen. There was no room for exploring. I'm kind of revisiting that maiden phase right now too, because, and that's something I like how you said that you are trying to form that ancestry moving forward. Something that I'm trying to show my daughter is that it's okay to not be perfect. It's okay not to walk a straight line, and it's okay to learn your lessons on the off-beaten path. So, but yeah, it was mostly that queen archetype, and that still lives on. Even when I go home today, I'm still a little uncomfortable. I love my family. They love me, but I'm like, no, I want to be that huntress, maiden, messy girl.
In myself, I see the sage, the one you come to for advisement, for wisdom, for atonement. I see the healer, definitely. There's a history of women healing people, giving them medicine, spiritual council. I also see the queen figure, where we can look to female authority and model the strongest of our people. And probably lastly, I would say the protectorate, the organizer, the women we have come to solve our problems, to organize, to bring our people together, the feminine aspect of, say, nationalism or societal organization.
At most points in my life, I've identified with at least 2 or 3. I've been a maid, I've been a mother. Right now, I would say I identify most with visionary and alchemist, sage. And I hope that at some point in the future, I can count myself among the wise.
Definitely, I would say definitely not the mother archetype. I've never been, it might come across as very strange, but I've never identified with that archetype. Even since my childhood, I remember that I never thought about being a mother or anything like that. And a few years ago, actually, it was interesting that all of a sudden I was thinking about having grandchildren. But in regard to the archetype of the mother and taking care of others, maybe not wanting to have the child and taking care of one, but as a teacher, when I look at it, it's another kind of like being the mother for a larger community, for a group of people. So that's just recently, actually, it came to me, and it was really interesting when I noticed that difference. So that nurturing part of that archetype is with me, but it's like I want it for larger group of people. I don't know why, so I'm thinking about it. But other archetypes, definitely the warrior woman, definitely I've seen it in myself. When I look back, I know that I didn't know how to use that archetype. Maybe I didn't have enough knowledge about it, and I couldn't relate in a proper way with it myself. But it has always been there, and when I look back also, I see that I identified with that archetype a lot in my life. The wise woman archetype also, the sage woman, that part also, when I look at that, also I noticed that I didn't have enough knowledge about it. I needed some intuition to get involved. When I look at it, I see that previously I was looking at these archetypes and identifying with them from a very logical point of view, and I needed something else with it. I was thinking about Sophia and how Sophia University has affected and impacted my life, and how it changed how I look at myself and the world and all that, and how I approach these archetypes. Now, for the last 10 years, it's been 10 years, and this year is my last year as a student with Sophia. But I've noticed that it had given me that opportunity and that space to tap into my mystic part, which has always been with me, but it had helped me to look at it in a different way. I understand it much better because that mystic part is also in my unconscious, collective unconscious, comes with our poetry, Persian poetry and all that. It is in there. But now I realize that I even understand the poetry, Persian poetry, that I've always read, always enjoyed, but I understand it in a different way, from a different angle. And so the mystic part, the mystic archetype, has been helping me to bring the other two, the warrior and the sage archetypes, together and look at them from a different angle and use them actually wisely. Yes. It has helped me. That's how I look at these archetypes. These are the ones that I identify a lot, and I'm happy that the mystic part, the mystic archetype, is getting developed and becoming stronger. Actually, I like that, and I'm allowing all of this to happen, and it's changing. My mythology. Yes, it's so wonderful. It's interesting.
I do see 3 archetypes in myself. One is the huntress, the sage, and also the mystic. I feel they are already inside of me, but each of them do have their own development time. When I was little, I felt strongly aligned with the huntress type. I'm always curious, always looking for experiential moments, and excited about finding new things. And later, to navigate through the world and navigate through academia, particularly, I developed sage characters. And I also feel strongly now connect with mystic character because I'm studying transpersonal psychology and do feel the strong connection with people, but not yet quite clear this mystic connection is. So I'm still curious. I do embody those three energies.
I place great importance on being a mother. I think that's who I am, and I feel the most comfortable in that role, at being a mother. And so I definitely feel that that is very much part of who I am. A mother to not only my children, but also I think to the wider community that my community, and also the community that I work in. I notice that I'm very maternal with a lot of the people that I work with as a psychologist who, come from disadvantage, and I definitely feel that I quite often step into that role. I also think I'm a warrior. As I said before, I come from a strong line of Aboriginal women who in their own right were warriors. And I think that that has been passed down to me, particularly, I think through my grandmother, who, wasn't afforded the same rights that I have today. But I have a absolute passion for social justice. I'm hugely determined to address the historical, political, and social disadvantage of my people. And I actively do that through my work as a psychologist, but also in terms of having those hard conversations and pushing some boundaries and highlighting the need for change and advocating for that. And so I definitely think I have the warrior in me. Whilst I'm quite a very sensitive, caring person, I have a fight in me that is quite gentle, but very determined. I think I'm also a visionary. I, very much believe that, I'm very optimistic. So I eternally believe and hope that things will change. I, try not to get stuck in that kind of deficit, language or that deficit mindset where I feel like there is no hope. So I definitely, advocate for hope and that we have the ability to make changes and positive changes. I'm not frightened to try new things, to, when people say, we can't do it that way. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I think we can. And so I'm very much a big picture person. So I think that is very much part of who I am. But the other part of me, which is probably testament to the work that I do, but I feel that I'm a healer and I don't mean that in terms of the way Aboriginal, and Torres Strait Islander people view healers. My people view healers in terms of, traditional healers such as the Nunkaries. That is not what I'm referring to. But what I am referring to is that I am very empathic. I come to things with kindness and compassion. I deeply care about my people. And I think that is really apparent in my interactions with people. I hope that I generate a lot of warmth and care, and through that process, creating those safe relationships and through mirroring love and warmth, that in itself is healing to a lot of people who have never experienced that kind of, connection before. So, in terms of my work as a psychologist, I predominantly work with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. And, quite often for the first time, this is their first encounter with a psychologist, because historically our profession did a lot of harm to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. So there is a significant legacy that we carry, and my understandings around our cultural ways, but also around the way we view our social and emotional well-being from a holistic perspective. I think I am able to bridge those gaps, and through my care and warmth and inviting people in, I think I have the ability to create a space where healing is possible.
I personally am going through some life transitions right now, like in a very good way though. And when I was thinking about it this morning, I very much had that huntress. And for me, I feel like it is a more mature huntress now versus when I was kind of forced into it as a young mom. And so the mature side of that looks like being a little bit more graceful about achieving my goals. But at the end of the day, achieving my goals is really, one of the only things that I do. I don't want to say care about, but that's what drives me is my goal achievement. I wanted to assume that I see queen in myself, but after doing a little studying, it's not there. I thought it was just because of the word queen, but it's definitely more huntress. And then I think the fun part for me is with this transition that I'm going through, my kids are grown and they've moved out. The lover is coming out, and I feel so fabulous about that. I'm turning red and sweating, but but it feels so good. I feel like I am in this space where I can come into my feminine now, and working through my master's degree with Sophia has, I think, led me to this space where I can do it from a mature and graceful standpoint.
What feels natural is mother, but in the sense of caretaker, and not necessarily like I am a mother, but I'm like caretaker, like I'm helping my family, specifically like my mother and my father as they elder. They're in their 70s and they're going through a transition, not like the transition of life, but like the transition of there's so many things I don't know how to do. Life is different. What do we do? Like financially, what do we do? So in all of those areas, and I've somehow become like the matriarch of my little family, of like the family I was born into. Yes. And so that is an archetype. I see it, and I definitely see that that's one that I've learned from my family, from my mother's in particular, and watching the women in my family. And just now that I'm really conscious of it, I want to be I want to move into divinity with it, like where I'm not at the effects of it. So what I see for myself that I haven't quite stepped into is the mystic, where my peace is the priority. And so I'm really like buckling down into that for myself, because I know that being out of balance in the warrior, in the mother, that I've been just exhausted. Like my physical body was like screaming at me. And so I've been taking time to focus on the how to step into the mystic and that be my primary function.
Australia is a racist country. We need to acknowledge that. We need to acknowledge the significant racism that occurs in this country. I mean, our past policies of child removal, the White Australia policy, segregating Aboriginal people from, being able to access a swimming pool, being able to get on the bus, being able to go to the pub in the same area as a white person. We have had laws that have segregated us from, white, mainstream society from the day dot. We have, experienced racially motivated policies that have had, a huge impact on us and continue to have. The legacies from those past policies, even practices like, calling Aboriginal, people, half castes, to actually have a policy where it was the government thought that it was the right thing to do to outbreed Aboriginal people through, and so removing Aboriginal kids that were of mixed blood. And Aboriginal people had dog tags where they walked around with a tag that, if they, that indicated their ability to move around more freely if they, had a certain quotient of, white, taking us off our lands and putting us into missions, into areas where we were denied our cultural practices. There was significant poverty and disadvantage, taking away our language, enforcing us to go to residential schools or homes that had a religious component of whether it be Catholicism or whatever that religious affiliation was, taking away our sense of spirituality and our connections to our ancestors. All of those things have a huge impact on us, and those legacies continue today. The disadvantage and not addressing the disadvantage by the government in terms of, listening to Aboriginal people about what we need, what we want. We know how to fix our own problems. We know what to do for ourselves, for our communities, for our families. This is around our self-governance and self-determination, those things being taken away from us. And with this top-down approach where we will tell you how to do things, we will tell you what's right for you, we will, we will ban all, access to, X, Y, Z, so you don't, exhibit those behaviours, or, we will, remove your children because, you're not fit to be a parent. All these things are very much a top-down, racially motivated approach, and they're not listening. They're not listening to us. They're not listening to us. They're not listening to the fact that we're intelligent people, We know what we need to do. And we need the opportunities to be able to do that. But we're denied those opportunities at every single corner. And so, you know, the government, the Australian government, you know, I have to say our current Prime Minister is working very hard to, you know, well, in my opinion, to try and address, you know, the disadvantage of Aboriginal people. But we have a significant, you know, other side of politics that I think are very damaging. They have no interest in elevating us to a position of strength or power, you know. And I think what's really interesting is that when we do pop our head up, they do everything to push us back down again, you know. It's not okay to be an intelligent Aboriginal person, you know. It creates obviously a lot of fear for people. And so I think the government has a lot of work to do. And I think off the back of this referendum, what we've seen is, again, there's significant racism that is evident in this country, and we need to address that. We need to address the racism. We need to address the colonial hatred of us. We can't do this. We've stood up time and time and time again, and to, you know, put our hand out. Yes, let's do it, you know, willingly. Yeah, let's work on this together. And we've been met with resistance and really, I think, an absolute refusal to acknowledge that we as a people know what's best for us. And this missionary style, paternalistic approach of treating us like we have no understanding, and that we're not able to govern ourselves, we're not able to, be effective and run communities and run organisations and whatnot, is really creating significant havoc. So the government needs to listen to us. They need to actively address the racism that's evident in this country. They need to allow us our voice, our right to live on our country, our land, and they need to respect that this is our land. We need to have the conversations that we are able to govern and our own communities in our own way, through our own cultural practices, with our own governance structures. And that self-determination is so important for us because we have been so oppressed.
Women Life Freedom, it was the first women-led revolution in the world. And still it's going on. Many people are still in prison. There were some executions. So yeah, it was a wonderful moment. And we in diaspora also supported them all over the world, Iranians all over the world. We were out there every weekend, being their voice and kind of attracting the attention of the world to what's going on in Iran. It was silenced. It's been silenced. So many things happened. It's just, yeah. We have those kind of uprisings once in a while, and it's against, of course, the government. It has political face to it, but it's for the freedom. It's for the freedom of everybody, and women always get involved in this. Iranian women are very involved in this in the society, and they are not allowed to have a voice, but they do have a voice since very beginning of the Islamic Republic. The very first demonstrations that Iranian women had was on March 8th. See, the revolution won. Khomeini went back to Iran. It was February of 1979. March 8, 1979, 100,000 Iranian women in Tehran had celebrated International Women's Day with being in the street and demonstrating against hijab. That's 45 years ago. And still Iranian women are fighting. It's a feminist movement in Iran is a very lively movement, and it's still going.
Well, for 40 years, I've been promoting the idea that the more we take up these matriarchal values, the more evolved we become, and the more peaceful our culture is likely to be. But at this point, it's so far beyond that. You know, the climate crisis and the devastation that patriarchy has created on this planet has gone so far that we are in danger of extinction. People have written about it and spoken about it as that we're in the sixth extinction. And we're having trouble as a collective, I think, to really acknowledge that and really deeply experience it in our bodies, because in order to stop it, we have to stop the corporate structures that are extracting all the minerals and oil and everything from underground and clear cutting the forests and all the things that are attempting to kill off Mother Nature. I don't really think you can do that. I sort of think that probably we'll just become extinct and Mother Nature will figure out a way to go on without us. It's a pretty big planet. What I really like, because I've been a healer most of my life, I like the word regenerative. I experienced that in the hands-on healing I did with people for many decades. There would be spontaneous recoveries and so on. Lots of experiences, lots of evidence, anecdotal evidence, as they like to say in science, that bodies are able to regenerate and that things can that the DNA, I remember reading an article once that said the DNA breaks down all the time and then repairs itself all the time. And so there's this natural process of change. We're not so solid as we think. We're not so permanent as we think. And I think that the Earth's regenerative powers are absolutely amazing. And that has impressed me more than any of science's scientific attempts to solve the problems they've caused using the same methods. In nature, things come back to life. There was a thing about Lake Erie a really long time ago, maybe in the 1980s or 1990s. Lake Erie was actually declared dead at one point because of all the paper pulp toxins that had been dumped into it and so on. And so they stopped that. They made that stop and they declared the lake dead. But what happened with the lake is that the lake had some magical property where it regenerated itself and came back to life. And that happens in all areas of nature. And it happens also in our own bodies and minds. And so I believe in that more than anything. I think scientifically it looks like we're doomed. And so I kind of hold that as one possibility, not a very nice one, but I want to be realistic and honest about what I see and what I believe is happening. On the other hand, I never give up hope because my hope lies in that wonderful, invisible, magical ability of life to regenerate itself. And we don't know what can happen that way. Right now, we're in the midst of all the, it's biblical. We're in the midst of famine, floods, fires, earthquakes, volcanoes, the natural phenomena are showing us that things are way out of line. But then you read about, this last week I read that the forests that they clear cut, then the forestry people had everybody plant trees. And that seems so wonderful. Oh, we're planting trees to replace the trees we took, so it's all going to be fine. Well, it turns out those trees, black spruce, I think they were mostly, probably this is in the northwest of the United States, those, or maybe Canada. Anyway, those trees were like matchsticks. So the fires that are happening are burning through those tree farms, that aren't forests at all. They're linear, they're trees planted in lines, and it doesn't work. We don't understand nature enough to take over. And the native people and the indigenous people and the matriarchal people all over this planet, they yield to nature. They understand themselves as part of nature. We have been in this country and European ancestry, and most of Western culture these days has been Christianized, scientized. We're taught to believe that we're separate from nature and that it's our job to dominate nature. And that's killing us. It's killing us individually, it's killing us collectively, it's killing the planet. But as I say, I don't really believe it will succeed. I think we'll do away with ourselves before that happens. And not to be too gloomy, I really do hold out for a matriarchal emergence. I just don't know if we're going to be saved in that way. It may be that our human story will come to an end. It may be, things. One of the epiphanies I had in the last few decades, when I was very despairing about the fact that we hadn't done the things that were going to be necessary to change the outcome, I was very upset. That's when I moved to the mountains in Santa Cruz, just to be quiet for a while and consider the problem. And at some point, I realized in my own life and in the lives of people around me, as humans, I think, well, we die. And that's okay. We live and we die. It's a process. I believe we return again and again to do that again and again. And so what's the problem? Why try to do scientific fixes that are going to keep us alive longer than we can enjoy in terms of quality? Why not yield to the passage of time and to the cycles of return? And then I realized, well then what's the problem on the larger scale of looking at it exactly the same way? Humans happened, we happened, it was like 400 million years ago, but then we evolved in different ways according to the evolutionary theories, and 200,000 years ago became the same as we are now, modern humans, Homo sapiens sapien. So for 200,000 years, we've created culture, human culture. And that's really interesting to me. And that's the story of the goddess, starting in Africa, coming into Europe in the Paleolithic times, creating all that beautiful art, which is so female-centered, organized around a great mother figure. And then finally, farming came out of that you could say that was an evolution, and people settled instead of moving about so much. And that turned into civilization. And for thousands of years, it was peaceful and healthy, and we have evidence of that. And then came warfare. And, it's the million-dollar question. Nobody knows exactly what made that happen. Those cultures didn't start out that way, but they ended up violent, brutal, militaristic, and organized warfare was invented, was developed. And we've been dealing with it for at least 5,000 years. And it's abominable. and it's going to take us out if we're not able to shift the whole thing. And I'm not sure we can. So then I have to think about it in that larger sense. Well, we had a good run. You know, we had a good run. We were peaceful on this planet and loving and caring and intelligent and creative. And oh well, you know, everything does come to an end. And as the pagans say, nothing really dies. Everything regenerates. Everything that dies is reborn. Everything in nature, including us, including entire cultural evolutionary cycles. So that's how I go on from day to day.
I think the dividing line between cultures is invisible. I think it's only there in our minds. Because, for one thing, we all came from Africa. Every single human being on this planet first originated in Africa, and we moved out. And so the archetypes were present even then, were present even before we were having these huge conversations or creating these huge religions. We moved out, we brought these archetypes with us as we moved out of Africa to all these different places. And then we were bounded by trade. You know, we came together with trade, and we came together in the formation of religion. You know, we have the three big Western religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Well, they're all related, and they all have the same archetypes. And you have Hinduism and Buddhism, and it's related, and it has the same archetypes. And you have the ancient religions in Egypt and Sumeria, and they're related, and they have the same archetypes. And the same thing with you know, the Yucatan Peninsula and Aztec and Inca, and you have the same thing with the Inuit, and you have the same thing with Aboriginal peoples. We all came from the same source. We all came from the same germ of human consciousness. And so these archetypes are going to be in us all, regardless of where we are geographically, culturally. That, like I said, that dividing line is invisible, and it's all in our minds. We all live on this earth. We are governed by one sun. We all share that same sun. We all share the same magnetic field of the earth. We all share the same planet, and our consciousness is really, you know, I know many people may disagree with this, but I do believe that our consciousness is all one. The separation is in our minds. It's just in our minds. So all these archetypes are present in each one of us, male and female alike, no matter where we are, no matter if it's day or night. They're all there.